Along with this new car that they're launching, I think they're calling it the Model S. They're proposing a system of solar charging stations around the U.S. that would allow you to charge for nearly free, and then perhaps you have the ability to actually, just make tiny little pit stops at little gas stations.
How long will it take to charge the battery?
That's the thing.
What kind of charge? Once they'd be sending,
Well,
you're looking at about a quarter of the amount of time that you would if you just plug it into a wall.
I think they're talking about swapping out the battery too, right?
what is it?
I think they're talking about swapping out the battery.
They could be that.
I've always thought that would be the ultimate way to get an efficient electric vehicle going. Is battery charge time is always the biggest pain in the butt, and the battery maintenance. So if you set up a system to where there's a standard battery that you can drive up to a service center, and just like they have to do in New Jersey, you can't fuel your own car. You can't change the battery. Pull to the station, they drop off your one battery. If you've got a smart car, they drop off your two batteries. If you've got a small SUV, they drop off half a dozen. If you've got a Suburban, and then they put fresh ones in and maintain properly. Take as much time as they need to charge them.
Yeah.
We had a car holder.
They already have that.
I know they were experimenting with like regular
protection money.
battery cells, and they had like holes in, and
Yeah.
Road maintenance.
I think so.
I heard about that a little bit. They were talking about that in the 70s, where they would have lead acid batteries, they'd flush all of the acid out of when they were depleted, and then flush fresh acid, basically. They'd charge that acid separately in a separate set of batteries and put that back in. It works short term, but the batteries won't last nearly as long because the lead on the inside of the batteries doesn't get properly recharged.
Yeah.
But as a quick charge
How
system,
do you get it?
interesting.
But the other good thing about this is before with the cars and automotives, they were always talking about the fact that even if you have like a hydrogen car or something, it wouldn't be something that would actually push back the grid. It would always be something, or even if you had an electric car, it would always be sucking off from the power plants. But with their charging stations, what they're proposing is basically having a system that, when it's not in use, their network of solar panels would be pushing back to the grid, so they'd actually be, I don't know what the correct term for it is, but it's like offset net. So it would be, instead of being carbon neutral or something like that, or
Positive.
carbon positive. So this would actually be beneficial instead of just being neutral.
And the long-term prospect of having electric cars tied into the grid like that, especially with like the Leaf and stuff like that, is even in the sense that they're, like you've got a Nissan Leaf plugged in your garage today, or whatever electric vehicle, you have a grid tie, it can be used in peak hours to draw some power out of your car, feed that to everybody's AC during the day when the electricity is a lot more expensive to generate because they're having to run diesel centers and stuff like that to keep up with the load. Instead, they can suck, say a 20% charge out of your car and help keep the grid stable and level so that the power needed to be generated can be kept more clean, because a large coal-fired plant is going to be more efficient and use less carbon per watt of power put out versus burning a bunch of diesel generators around town to keep up different corners of town when they could be kept up potentially by electric cars if they were heavily integrated enough.
It's a really clever move on Musk's part, because he owns Solar City, which is like the largest solar manufacturer.
Yeah,
So it's a
it's
perfect synergy for him.
Yeah, it's in the article down there. This electricity used by the supercharger comes from the solar car forces provided by Solar City.
Yeah.
So it's clever.
He's got his own business.
He's using his own resources, building his empire.
Yeah.
But I guess there's only like a couple more things that I mentioned. So usually you'll have two types of systems with solar panels. You'll have either on-grid or off-grid systems. On-grid basically just means that it has an inverter that's tied to the grid. So it basically means that it's synchronized with the grid, the grid's voltage and frequency.
So the same wires that run your outlets run from JA and from your solar panels.
Right.
That's the one that will lower your bill by, so, yeah.
But that's something that you actually have to have contracted, you actually have to get commissioned, you actually have to...
Inspections.
More complicated.
Yeah. You have to have electricians come in and say, yeah, this is right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But partially that goes also into destabilizing it, because if you have a three-phase system, that's what the three wires that you see going to one's place.
Right.
If you, every single house is going to get only about two phases, and so if your house is pushing back out, so much voltage, then you're pushing up these two phases, and then there's going to be one that's going to be unbalanced.
So it's actually, it's good to a point that you feed back into the system, but after a certain point, you're actually potentially going to damage other people's power feeds, or make them
You
less,
can destabilize it.
yeah,
Yeah.
make funky things happen with their power.
But basically, it would be JEA side to make sure that everything is, all the load is being shared out,
Yeah.
and that, you're not destabilizing it.
And when you hear about, if you've ever heard in the news about how there's problems with trying to implement solar grid tie and more generally broadly distributed power systems instead of just having big generator stations, and how we have a dumb grid or whatever that's not ready for that sort of stuff, that's the sort of problem. Because right now it's set up where they can only feed power out and monitor how much you use, but the system isn't really set up to balance that load when you have multiple unexpected points feeding various amounts of power at different times of the day back into the system.
But another thing that a lot of people are proposing is actually, there's a lot of energy that's lost in transmission of voltage from JE's plant. So along the way, what they're proposing is actually having solar panels going all the way down the lines. So that
trickle some extra.
what is it?
Trickle some extra.
Basically to trickle energy back in so that you don't have to pump out more from the plant.
Because they're already on the right way to run the big
Seems real
power
power station.
stations.
Yeah.
Considering,
Once
it's
you
not
call
DC,
these
and
multipliers,
then
the line goes down low.
Yeah, they basically like just have like one big inverter at the plant or like one of their substations, and then tie all the solar panels back to that substation and feed that back.
There's a
the great place for that would be, the super high tension lines.
where they've got a quarter-mile
They
wide.
can pretty much just hang off of it, as long as they hang flat like a train. They catch it out of the sky all day.
And that'll hold through strong winds as well, or?
Depends on how you hang it.
Sturdy hangers, stiff hangers, so even if they flip, it's around, still going around. Probably balance itself around.
It's a potential.
I mean, even in that kind of instance, you have to have an inverter on each span.
Yeah, because
Each string is each
it's
span.
DC. So you have to be generating more than enough power to get past the inefficiency of the inverter, kicking it back into the system from DC to AC.
All the while cooling the inverter, keep it cool. Things and stuff.
But that just comes back to the cost per watt equation, because if the cost per watt goes down far enough, you can just fill the entire field instead of with cows and grass. You can just cover it with panels and, generate half the power for Mandarin on the way there instead of trying to push twice as much power as Mandarin needs down the lines because they're coming from the north side.
And you need that water.
I don't have to look at grass.
so you have your on-grid systems, and then a general off-grid system, you basically have solar panels, and then you tie that back to like a charging controller, like a system that we have in the back.
But usually actually drives.
Present?
No one actually gets on the bicycle and rides.
Yeah. But you'll have a charging controller that the basic importance of that is when the solar panels are off, it cuts off the circuit to the battery so that when you charge your battery during the day, it doesn't drain out the battery through the solar panels at night. So
Right, because that's the other function of the solar panel is if you feed it light, it makes power. But if you feed it power, it will generate a little bit of heat. As I understand it.
Should generate light.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
it generates light, just not on a frequency that's lit for us to see.
Technically, every single solar panel is a photodiode, so it's basically something that just pushes electricity in one direction when exposed to light. But basically, along with your charging controller, you'll have a battery, and you might have like for a small system, you might have like a 100 amp hour battery. And then beyond that, you'll probably have an inverter. But instead of being a synchronous inverter like you use in a grid type system, you use a asynchronous inverter. So it's basically something